Official trade figures released this week caused quite a stir on various pro-Brexit news outlets and websites, since they appear to show UK exports to the EU in the second quarter of the year surging ahead after Brexit. Based on ONS, I made a video on that one too. But the truth is not quite as the headlines might have you believe. A tweet from Foxhole News, with 5,000 Twitter followers, greeted the stunning new figures with glee and final proof that Project Fear had been busted. Pro-EU supporters would be left red-faced apparently. Foxhole's report calls the figures stunning and says exports shot up 29% year-on-year in June as the UK continued to pull out of the pandemic with a world-class jabbing program and staged reopening of society and the economy. The report describes UK exports surging despite the most dire predictions from rabid pro-EU campaigners. Facts for EU, another pro-Brexit website, also hailed the ONS data as vindication over the 5 years of upheaval, with their analysis showing UK exports to the EU have rebounded by 31.5% since the first quarter of the year and are 20% higher than they were 5 years ago, just before the EU referendum. All the figures come originally from the ONS release on Thursday of UK trade data up to the end of June, although Foxhole relies on a report on Bloomberg for their sensational claims. The figures on the surface do seem to paint a bright picture, although I confess looking through the ONS details, you cannot find the 29% Bloomberg users or the 31.5% facts for EU users. But they are not far out. The general picture is of an economy coming out of lockdown hibernation after an enormous body blow delivered by Brexit. But what is the reality now? The ONS urges caution, however, and says that 2020 data was strongly affected by the coronavirus pandemic. It helpfully provides a comparison with 2018, when trade was not impacted either by COVID-19 or the end of the transition period. Because 2020 was so unusual, a massive rebound was inevitable from such a low base. And that is what the ONS said. Exports and imports of goods increased in quarter 2 in 2021 when compared with the same period in 2020, but fell by 4.4% when compared with the same period in 2018. So, it's not all that rosy. It's also possible that the facts for EU figures showing a 20% increase in exports to the EU uses figures from the second quarter in 2016 and not adjust them for inflation to make them appear exceptionally good. What these reports show is the sheer desperation on behalf of Brexiteers to grab anything that looks remotely like good news. Unfortunately, the ONS figures are not the lifeline they think. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, Great Britain's economic and trade were never going to collapse to zero. These things are relative and not absolute, and whatever the figures show, they will be worse than they otherwise would have been had they remained EU members. Brexiteers are still clinging to the idea that erecting trade barriers with Britain's largest trading partner will have no effect and even lead to an increase in trade. And that's BS from the beginning, because that's impossible, and they must know that. The ONS says Great Britain's exports to the EU overtook non-EU countries in May and remained higher in June. The figures indicate that while trading with the EU has shown a strong recovery driven by a £0.9 billion increase in exports of chemicals, medicinal and pharmaceutical products, exports to the rest of the world have slumped. The ONS says total exports of goods fell in June 2021, driven by falling exports to non-EU countries. There was a weak increase in exports to EU countries. Perhaps it is still not quite the surge that has been claimed. Exports to the rest of the world of chemicals, cars, machinery and transport equipment, medicinal and pharmaceutical products all fell in June. They were told by Vote Leave that one of the main reasons for Brexit was the shrinking importance of the EU market for UK exporters, which meant they needed to trade with faster growing non-EU economies in the East. To be consistent, now that exports to the EU are rising faster than non-EU exports, the same people should be pressing for the UK to rejoin, but that will never happen. And At least Great Britain's exports to the EU seem to be holding up. But in a way that is familiar to anyone who has watched UK trade over the years, imports are increasing even faster. The ONS said, imports of goods from EU countries drove the increase in total imports of goods in June 2021. And this has resulted in a widening of the trade deficit. Deficit is the difference between what you export and what you import. And the deficit is 5.2 billion in quarters 2 in 2021. But they don't tell you that on Foxhole or Facts for You. RTE in Ireland is reporting that imports to the EU from the UK have actually fallen by 20% in the first 6 months, and in June and May were lower than volumes recorded at the end of last year, according to Eurostat data. This is precisely the opposite of the ONS data released on Thursday, as RTE acknowledged. The discrepancy is apparently partly explained by a change in the way Eurostat calculates trade with Great Britain after Brexit. When they were EU members, all goods which arrived in another member state from Britain were treated as British exports. But since January, goods originated outside the UK, goods made in China, which are transshipped through Britain into the Netherlands, for example, are now treated as imports from China rather than from Britain. That's the rules of origin thing once again. And nothing can be read into the ONS. It's such a short period anyway. And trade is very volatile on short term, so forget that one. The British Chamber of Commerce issued a lengthy statement which gives a more balanced view. William Bain, head of trade policy at the BCC, said, there has been a slight decrease in overall exports by £0.6 billion, which has been matched by the slight increase in imports by £1 billion. The export data has been driven by increased sales to the EU by 1.2% as demand picked up following the release of lockdowns and the unbundling of pre-Brexit stockpiles as firms begin to reorder. By contrast, non-EU exports fell by 5.6% between May and June this year. And Bain adds that the rise in EU imports was largely down to more cars coming into the UK. By contrast, car exports to non-EU countries saw falls over the last few months, partly explained by staff and semiconductor shortages. He said, compared with quarter second in 2018, the last stable period before EU exit, total exports including the EU were down by 4.4% and imports by 2%, comparing June 2021 with June 2018. Total UK exports including to the EU were down by 7.4% and imports by 2%. This is a further signal of the dampening effect on EU-UK trade caused by the move to the new trading arrangements under the TCA. They will continue to monitor this over the coming months as further data emerges. And of course, I had some Brexiteers on my other channel where I talked about the ONS figures when they were published. Were saying you can't tell your people that, they all hate the UK and they don't like it when you say something positive. I explicitly said that was published by the ONS. I have not said that as the truth. And that happens when people don't listen, probably. So, I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.